Failure is a lack of success or the omission of expected or required action. So is failure present when becoming someone that doesn't drink alcohol? I know the title says that it doesn't, but I'm starting to think in the time that it's taken me to create that title that maybe the answer is yes and maybe the answer is no. But before I get to that, first, a couple of quotes from Brené Brown's great book, Daring to Lead. If you choose courage, you will absolutely know failure, disappointment, setback, and even heartbreak. That's why we call it courage, and that's why it's so rare. If we are brave enough, often enough, we will fall. Daring is not saying I'm willing to risk failure. Daring is saying I know I will eventually fail, and I'm still all in. I've never met a brave person who hasn't known disappointment, failure, and even heartbreak. Now, to understand failure as it applies to our work, we have to define success. And for me, success is not whether we drink alcohol or not. The truth about alcohol philosophy is so vast that it swallows alcohol as a galaxy does to planet Earth. Truth about alcohol philosophy helps you to become the best version of yourself. And for me, there is no failure during this voyage into the apocalypse of your mind, only opportunities to learn. Where we do encounter failure, however, is the omission of expected or required action. We only improve, we only get better when we do the work. And you're here to do the work. And you know when you're skipping school. And hopefully, in today's podcast, I can help you better understand the consequences. My name is Lee Davey. I'm not an alcoholic. I refuse to be anonymous. I am someone that doesn't drink alcohol. And I spend every waking moment helping other people do the same. So where do we begin on this question of failure? I mean, I think we start by admitting and addressing that it's not a word that we like. That if you've been raised in Western society and Western culture, which likely most of you have, then failure is a negative connotation. It is something that we associate and have associated with not being good enough. And if you go to the Strive Community Forum and you read everybody's introductions, you'll see a great swathe of them will include experiences where parents have made their children feel like failures or have really tried to push from an athletic or a educational perspective this drive to be something, and that if you do not achieve that something in inverted commas, then you are a failure. I mean, I have a 2-year-old daughter, Zia, and when me and Zia talk about or try to, like say if we play a game or we decide to have a run, I slip into the modus operandi of there being a winner or a loser. And Zia already at 2 doesn't like it to be a loser. It's almost like it's built into her DNA. It's like it's in our evolution, like it's in our genes to succeed. The old selfish gene philosophy. And I see that in her too. So I have to be really careful about how I raise her and talk to her around this question of failure, around this question of winning and losing, because I do want her to compete. I do think it's important. I think competition is important, but it needs to be balanced with joy. Especially when you see that today our children have to deal with something that we never did, which is social media. And the failure to look good, the failure to fit in, the failure to play the role that you feel your tribe needs you to has never been more accentuated than it is today through Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. So more and more and more, those conversations that we have with our children and the way that we raise them and the values that we subject them to and we try to cultivate in their lives have never been more important to talk about this term failure. And what the part of the problem is, very few of us know how to deal with it because of the way that we were taught about it by our forebearers, our forefathers and our foremothers who didn't have a Scooby-Doo themselves. When it comes to being someone that doesn't drink alcohol, how does failure show itself? So covered there a little bit about how we come to the table, if you like, dripping with failure. So how does failure then manifest itself at Strive? Well, I think the first most important area to talk about, maybe it'll be the only area I'll talk about today, is when we drink alcohol. Okay, so let's say you come to Strive and you're ready to take action. You feel ready to take action. You trust me and the other Truth About Alcohol ambassadors to hold your hand and to give you a hug and to guide you while you take action to become someone that doesn't drink alcohol. And the first step in taking action is to take the Taster Experience, which is a 27-day program, right? Let's say you've done that. And then I think on day 3 or 4, you take the vow. So you take a solemn vow not to drink alcohol for 27 days. Now I'll let you into a little secret. When we first created the taster, the vow was this. The vow was, I, Lee Davey, vow to do my very best not to drink alcohol for the next 27 days. And if I do drink alcohol, I will only do so when I've used all the tools and the skill sets at my disposal. That was the vow. And in the early days of the taster, whenever people were taking that vow, they would say to me, it doesn't feel right. I don't want to try my best to not drink alcohol for the month. I want to make a vow that I'm never going to drink alcohol for the month. So we changed the wording. And now the vow is, I vow, Lee Davey, to not drink alcohol this month, right? But I appreciate the boldness and the courage. But we also need to marry that with an acceptance that there is a mathematical likelihood that in those 27 days, we may drink alcohol. So while we're taking action, we may take alcohol. And that mathematical percentage, although I don't know what it is likely to be very high. So in layman's terms, the likelihood of you drinking alcohol when you decide to take the Taster Experience for 27 days or the intensive is quite high. And it gets higher the longer you do the work. So it's more likely that you'll drink alcohol while you're taking the intensive than it is when you're taking the taster lightly, because it's more time. It's more time to deal with, and because you've got more time, the life is going to throw more bags of shit in your direction, right? So one of the first things you're going to do is you're going to feel like, if I'm counting days, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, now all of a sudden I'm going to be a failure, right? Because if I've now got back to 1, I'm a failure. I've taken a vow. I'm not supposed to drink for 27 days. I can't even make it to fucking day 1. What is the matter with me? Like, I'm a failure. Now that's because we've been programmed to feel that way. And what we want to do at the Truth About Alcohol, and I said in the opening statement that the alcohol is not what we're about. It's a tiny fraction of what it is to be at the Truth About Alcohol. To be someone that doesn't drink alcohol, the alcohol is a tiny fraction of that. We are about creating the best versions of ourselves. And if we have developed the habit and continue the habit of going within ourselves and telling ourselves that we're ugly, that we're not good enough, that we're thick, we're stupid, if we perceive that we failed at something, then we are making it very difficult for ourselves to be the best version of ourselves. So we need to start practicing a little self-empathy, a little self-compassion, a little self-sympathy. We need to raise our levels of low self-esteem, and we need to start cutting ourselves some slack. And a lot of you will be asking for permission. You'll be seeking for permission to be able to do that. So I want to give you that permission. And all Truth About Alcohol ambassadors want to give you that permission, and all strivers want to give you that permission. That if you, when you're taking the taster, or when you remember a strive, or when you take the intensive, drink alcohol, that's all right. It's part of the process. But there's a caveat to it, right? There's a caveat to it. And it goes back to the dictionary definition of failure. It was split into two parts. Part one was failure is a lack of success. Well, if we redefine what success looks like and we say that success is not getting through 27 days of not drinking. Success is getting through 27 days. And when you're at the end of the taster, your knowledge and understanding about alcohol, about what it is, about why you're addicted to it and what that means, as long as that has grown, as long as your experience has grown and you're now more mindful around alcohol, that is a success. It's not whether you've drunk alcohol or not. And if we move into the intensive, and you've got to bear in mind, if you think about the 6 stages of change as created by James Prochaska, and I just interviewed the fella, and he reminded me again that, the 6 stages of change are pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance, and termination. And the maintenance phase is phase where we have become someone that doesn't drink alcohol, but we're still rewiring these neurons, this creating this new connection to what alcoholism is. It's going to take around 5 years. 5 years. So what's the likelihood in those 5 years that, we're going to have some bumps along the way? And do you really want to just focus on alcohol for 5 years? Do you just want me talking to you about alcohol? Well, of course not. So this goes back to being someone that doesn't drink alcohol is being the better versions of ourselves. So for the next 5 years, we're going to work on that. So failure, when we define success in the terms of success to us as being the better version of ourselves, then every time we fail, we give ourselves the opportunity to learn from that failure, right? So I went through a divorce after 3 years through my maintenance stage, and I drank alcohol. I would actually say I was in my termination stage, actually. I was done with it. I was never going to drink again, but then I got divorced. And then I started to think that I was ugly. I started to think that nobody would want me, that I would be lonely. And then I started to see value in drinking. And all of a sudden, the monster came in and the door opened and the resistance flew in with a flamethrower and started fucking burning all the neurons that I spent 3 years creating, that alcoholism is an invisible, violent, dominant belief system. And all of a sudden, I had a big problem on my hands. But I learned from that. I drank for a month. I learned from it a great deal. I now know that I can handle extreme grief without drinking alcohol. I have learned that I'm not ugly. I am learned that the mathematical probability of me being alone, if I am alone forever, is markedly minimal. It's unlikely to happen. So I was worrying about something that was unlikely to happen. I developed a compassion with myself and an empathy for myself. I learned to talk about it and to be vulnerable and to share my story with people. And I also learned how to be a better husband. And if I ever go through a divorce again, I will know how to go through that experience a much better man and having more compassion and love and caring for other people rather than myself. So you can look at it and say that it was a failure, I didn't have the power or the skills to keep a relationship together. But you can also look at every failure as a success. And what I want you to do at The Truth About Alcohol is I want you to do that. I want you to look at every single failure as a success. I'm not going to namby-pamby around the power of words and say that the word failure should be removed from our dictionary because it has negative connotations and we should change it, all that kind of nonsense. If that works for you, great. I'm not poo-pooing it because I know words are really important, so I shouldn't have said that so flippantly, actually. But for me, I like the word failure because I identify with it. I understand what it means to me, and to change the meaning helps me more than change the actual word. If you drink alcohol, it's a normal part of the process. Now, here's the second part of that dictionary definition. So the first part was failure is a lack of success. Well, we just redefined success. The second part is, or the omission of expected or required action. Failure is the omission of expected or required action. Now, this is where failure really does exist within the truth about alcohol, okay? Really does exist. But we still need to be very empathic and be very vulnerable and to have a lot of courage in this area. You are not going to be the best version of yourself without a lot of hard work, without a lot of introspection, without a lot of reading, without a lot of changes in relationships, a lot of changes in your choice of job, career, without becoming a better communicator. Basically, you could look at your life and you can break it down into relationships, wealth, career, spirituality, etc., etc. And in order for you to become the better version of yourself, you're going to have to continually work at those areas. So being someone that doesn't drink alcohol falls under the banner of health and wellness. So if we look at ourselves and we say we want to be the healthiest person that we want to be, then pouring a powerful poison down our throat with all the negative associations that come with it and how it damages our relationships and our mindset and who we are as a human being, then we're not going to drink alcohol, right? But you need to look at this holistically. Again, going back to the Prochaskas and the interview that I had with them, which will be released next week, like they said, it's really important when you go through the 6 stages of change that you look through the lens of every area of your life. So James said an interesting thing. He said, when you feel triggered to drink alcohol, go for a walk. And while you're going for a walk, talk yourself, basically talk about the trigger, like talk yourself out of it. Just, ask yourself questions about what you're feeling around that trigger, etc., etc. Then the next day, go for a walk and ask similar questions about your finances. And then the next day, go for a walk and ask yourself questions about your marital status and your sex life. And then go for a walk the next day and ask you questions about your job. Continually improving other areas of your life means that it's going to be more difficult for you to self-medicate with alcohol, because you won't need to self-medicate because you're not unhappy anymore. Most of us are drinking alcohol for one description or another because we're lacking in an area of our life that we think alcohol is either going to fill or is going to allow us to continue avoiding dealing with it. That is not the way, the truth about alcohol. The intensive is a year-long experience. The videos last about 4 months. I'm seriously thinking of extending it to 5 years, because if the maintenance phase is 5 years, and think about it, if we want to be the best version of ourselves, isn't that a lifetime gig? Isn't even 5 years a mere dot in the landscape of what we're trying to achieve here? So back to the omission of expected or required action. The secret sauce to being someone who doesn't drink alcohol, the alcohol part of that equation, and not the better version of ourselves. So the more microscopic aspect of it, like being someone who doesn't drink alcohol, stopping the alcohol, the actual roadmap is quite simple. It's not the roadmap that's the problem. I don't have to fix the roadmap to improve or increase the numbers of people who come through our doors and leave the other end as someone who doesn't drink alcohol. I don't have to do that at all. What I need to do is work on helping people to prepare themselves for the shit boat of work that they're going to have to do. But this isn't bad work. We're not going to put you in manacles and give you a pick and stick a black and white uniform on you and tell you to smash up rocks for the rest of your life. You're not Sisyphus, like holding the boulder and rolling it up the hill like every day of your life. This is fun. This is enjoyment. Finding out who you are, learning and growth. We're not in school. Like, when you're learning this shit, you're not looking for the bell to ring. You're wondering why you don't have time to do more of it. It's wonderful stuff. Now, if you come to Strive and you are open to being learned to allow mentors to teach you how to prepare for change. And then when you're ready to change, you join Strive and you check in every day. But you don't just check in and say, hi, I'm Fred, how's it going? You check in and say, hi, it's Fred, and I feel like shit today. Or, hi, it's Fred, I looked in the mirror today and for the first time in my life, I thought I looked good looking. Or, I need help with something. right? If you're doing that every day, then that's part of the roadmap. If you are asking for help when you need it, that's part of the roadmap. If you are thinking today that you're going to drink alcohol and you're posting triggers, that's part of the roadmap. If you take action to take the taster and do all the assignments, roadmap. Listening to all my podcasts, roadmap. Reading all the books, Alan Carr, Annie Grace, roadmap. Taking the intensive to go through the maintenance stage of your recovery for 5 years, roadmap. What I'm saying, folks, is if you want to be someone that doesn't drink alcohol, you need to learn to accept the advice that is coming from the mentors that have done a lot of work that you have not done to make things easier for you. And if we think about the Prochaskas, two lovely people that I just interviewed, who have done a lot of research over many, many years and have shown that it takes 5 years to be in a maintenance stage, then you need to batten down the hatches. You need to dig a big trench. You need to hold somebody's hand and you need to get ready for a fight, a long-term fight. Now, the omission of expected or required action. So you now know what the action is. You need to check in every day. You need to read the books. You need to meditate. You need to exercise. You need to go for walks. You need to have a toolkit for relapse. You need to use that toolkit. All this stuff that you need to do, you know what you need to do. And if you don't do that, there is an omission of the expected or required action, then you failed. That is where failure exists within someone who doesn't drink alcohol. When you give up, when you stop doing the work, when you run away, that is failure. Drinking is not a failure, right? I'm going to pay particular attention to Kim right now. Kim is someone who is currently taking the taster, okay? Kim has at least 4 times in the last 5 or 6 days posted in triggers. Nobody's ever done that before. Nobody's ever done that. I think on day 12, she went 11 days she went without drinking, and on the 12th day she had a drink. And then she's been posting 4 out of 5 days in triggers. Kim hasn't ran off. Kim hasn't stopped doing her assignments. Kim hasn't run away. Kim is posting in the triggers. Kim, she was on the podcast episode live one I did with John Bell the other week, learning, asking questions. She's been sending me messages. She's been asking Craig, her ambassador, questions. She's been doing the work. Like, she's just doing the work. And out of that drinking episode she did on day 12, she's learned so much about herself. So much. So it wasn't a failure. And she hasn't run away. She's continuing to do the work despite having a drink. So there's no omission of expected or required action. Okay? Now, I don't want to ride roughshod over how difficult it is not to run away when you feel the shame and the guilt of having a drink, or you feel like you're not good enough, or you compare yourself to other strivers, you know? Rather than comparing yourself to other strivers, look at those other strivers for inspiration to see that these flesh and blood commoners of the earth have managed to do what you're trying to do. And look at that in an inspirational light. Don't be threatened or challenged by it. There is no judgment here at Strive, right? You turn up, and when you say you've had a drink, everybody will rally around you. Everybody. When you first come to Strive and post an introduction, you will get a lot of people coming out of the woodwork to welcome you. And when you drink alcohol, you'll have a lot of people come out of the woodwork to help you. It's just always happens. And why? Because they know how it feels to be new. They know how it feels to do something so daunting. They know how it feels to just not have a fucking clue what to do. And what I want you to do is I want you to trust the process. I want you to trust me. I want you to trust my choice of ambassadors. I want you to trust the quality of the work and the philosophy. And I want you to get stuck in and do the work. Okay? Failure is a lack of success or the omission of expected or required action. That's a dictionary definition. Remember, we've redefined what success means to us. Success is becoming the best version of ourselves. It's not drinking alcohol, okay? And the omission of expected or required action means if you know what work you need to do to be someone that doesn't drink alcohol and you're not doing that work, then that is a failure. You are failing in that area. However, as long as you're able to give yourself some love and compassion and understanding about why you're failing to do it and to reach out for people to make head or tail of it and help you through it, a very rough, emotionally difficult time, then we can turn that around from a failure to a success. And I'll leave you with these quotes from Brené Brown again. If you choose courage, you will absolutely know failure, disappointment, setback, or even heartbreak. That's why we call it courage, and that's why it's so rare. If we are brave enough often enough, we will fall. Daring is not saying I'm willing to risk failure. Daring is saying I know I will eventually fail, and I am all in anyway. I've never met a brave person who hasn't known disappointment, failure, or even heartbreak. If you've got any questions on this whatsoever, let me know. And the taster, the intensive, valuable experiences that you should be taking part of. And if you're not taking part of those, Annie Grace has something similar. Holly Whitaker has the Hip Sobriety School. You just have to Google it. There are so many people out there trying to help, but you need to experience these things. You need to put faith and trust in somebody, because only when you develop that sense of trust can you move into vulnerability. And I think that's really important connective piece to courage, especially reading Brené Brown's work. So take care and have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye-bye.